Our week-long series, Food Insecurity, continuing now with Robert Zoellick. He's the president of the World Bank, whose $1.5 billion global food crisis response program is helping to feed some 40 million people around the globe. Bob, great to have you here with Matt and me on Street Smart. First, I have to ask you about the unfolding situation in Egypt. You know, food and higher prices, certainly a component to what's going on in terms of the Egyptian unrest. Your thoughts on how things are unfolding in Egypt at this point?
Well, it's obviously very fluid and could turn out to be a very big news day, but I think we have to try to be thinking about the day after the day after. You know, Egypt is a very big wheat importer. Food prices have been going up. So while we're in a transition process, we have to be trying to think about how to help the country get through to the next steps.
Is this a big message to everybody who's facing a similar situation? Because higher food prices, we're seeing it all around the globe at this point.
Well, I think Egypt, as any country does, has some unique circumstances, and I don't think this is purely driven by the economics. You had, in a sense, a partial modernization process and some sclerosis on the government side and accountability and other issues. But there's no doubt that we're seeing rising food prices, just as we saw a couple of years ago, and it puts stress on the most vulnerable. People often in developing countries spend half or three-quarters of their income on food, so they've got little margin.
I wonder, you know, there are problems specific to Egypt, though, that make it more difficult. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, it takes 2 years to start a business there. You have to talk with 56 government agencies. It takes 10 years to have private title, official legal title to land. And, of course, there are strange reports that Hosni Mubarak has $40 to $70 billion. If you can feed 40 million people with $1.5 billion, then I'm sure that kind of money would help out the country. Do you think that big changes need to be made here?
Well, you know, Egypt is a country where it had been making some good progress in terms of broad growth, reduction of poverty, some of the characteristics like maternal mortality, infant mortality. But like many countries all across the Arab world, it faced a youth bulge. And it had very large unemployment of both educated and uneducated young people. And that put a lot of stress on the system. And I think this goes to the point about a partial modernization. I mean, one striking statistic is South Korea has less population than Egypt, but its manufacturing exports in one day exceed those of Egypt for a year. So this is a country that will need to have ongoing reforms, and that plays back into the politics because it's not so clear how the politics will produce the economic reforms.
You know, Bob, politics play into everything, and I think about something, you know, you say the biggest challenge facing most developing countries is the risk of a big boost in food prices. You know, your global food crisis response program is certainly addressing that. What is it that really needs to be done, even more so, if you will, by everybody kind of around the globe? I mean, what is it that maybe folks are missing at this point when we look at this potential global food crisis?
Well, you know, the starting point is you have about 1 billion people in the world that don't have enough food to eat. And then that, for many of them, contributes to lack of nutrition, which can be particularly hard on, you know, pregnant women, children under the age of 2. So these are fundamental factors for the future of a lot of countries. On the one hand, there's a possibility of turning this into an opportunity. So we and others have been trying to stress over the past couple of years increased investment in food production and increased productivity, including for smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. And that looks all across the value chain, from property rights, seeds, irrigation, fertilizers. About half the food is lost on the storage side. But in the near term, we have to have programs that focus on these vulnerable populations. And frankly, we have to stop governments from doing things that make the problem worse. For example, export bans, which just add to the uncertainty and volatility in markets. So there are a number of steps that we've tried to recommend that can be taken to support the issues of food price volatility. At the same time, we work on food security over a longer term.
What do you think of, by the way, a subject we've been talking about a lot lately, Bob, has been price controls, price ceilings, and price floors because of the commodity speculation and prices that we've seen. Is that a good thing in some situations, or is it always going to cause distortions with supply?
It's a bad policy. Obviously, if you put on food price controls, the signal it sends to your farmers is not a good one. Similarly, you've seen with some countries under stress very large salary increases for populations. So what we've seen in the food crisis, which really predated the financial crisis, is you can actually keep within budgets some targeted programs on those most in need. It may be a school feeding program. It may be a food for work program. Countries like Mexico started these conditional cash transfer programs where you had money go to the poorest, and in return you had children have to go to school and get health checkups. So there's really a need for a good policy focus. But also in the global economic community, it would help to have better information on food stocks. Part of the market's reaction, of course, is to the uncertainty in markets.
Right.
The stock information is pretty good in the developed world, not so good in the developing world.
Okay.
Issues like long-range weather forecasting, which you have in the developed world, not in the developing world. In some parts of the world, such as the Horn of Africa, you probably need modest food stocks because we know you're going to have problems and the infrastructure is weak.
Okay.
So these are areas we could work together on.
A lot of things we would definitely work on. Bob, thank you so much. Bob Zoellick, the president of the World Bank, joining us here this afternoon.